Alors, ce qu'on fait aujourd'hui, c'est la première fois qu'on le fait depuis le début de la pandémie. On a fait surtout des interactions, un one-on-one avec des clients. Ceux qui nous connaissaient avant connaissent le centre d'innovation. C'est ce que vous voyez derrière moi, c'est ce que vous voyez dans la slide. Le centre d'innovation est localisé à une place où on ne peut pas aller en ce moment, malheureusement, mais c'est le concept qui est intéressant, qui permet vraiment d'avoir des échanges d'idées. Fait que ce qu'on voulait faire aujourd'hui, dans la série de webinaires qui va s'en venir, c'est de vous donner cette expérience-là du centre d'innovation, mais en virtuel. Alors, vous nous donnerez notre feedback, c'est très important. Puis le but, c'est de pouvoir vous partager l'information et d'échanger entre nous aussi.
Donc, pour ceux qui ne me connaissent pas, mon nom c'est Jimmy Grondin, je suis architecte de solutions chez PCD. Aujourd'hui, pourquoi nous avons présenté la session aujourd'hui, faire face aux attaques ransomware? Bien, premièrement, c'est qu'on a vu une augmentation importante dans les derniers 18 mois des attaques ou des risques d'attaques chez nos clients. Donc, nos experts, moi-même, Jimmy Grondin, on va avoir Sean Colicchio, le leader de la pratique cybersécurité en Amérique du Nord pour Converge, Yann White, responsable du développement de la pratique cybersécurité, et Manuel Abellan, un de nos experts techniques que vous connaissez sûrement. Je voulais aussi vous mentionner que les présentations se feront en anglais et avec Sean et Yann White. Prochaine slide. Je vais aussi remercier nos deux commanditaires pour la session aujourd'hui, donc Quizity et Pure Storage. Donc, je vais passer la balle à Sean Colicchio. So, Sean, the floor is all yours. Merci.
Thanks. So for the sake of time, we're going to just jump right into it. You know, when we think about incident response, specifically ransomware in that example, a lot of firms may see it as a challenge, right? Obviously, but what we're trying to educate on today is more of it being an opportunity for the business to not just proactively address these concerns before they happen, but there are some examples, historically speaking, where a solid incident response program that responds to an incident actually makes your stock price rise after a ransomware incident. So one of the things we like to start off with is some of the news and headlines that we're seeing over the past year. One of the things that we found is that as organizations started to move into work from home, into a more semi-permanent state, there were a lot of individual users that thought that they were being proactive by installing security software on their machine. Something like this headline, for example, is a VPN client called Proton VPN that was a consumer-grade VPN, and that website that was hosting the actual installer was compromised with malware. And so every individual user that was going to the site for a certain amount of time was downloading a compromised installer to then send all of their network traffic to some third party before it went out to the internet. So in the process of trying to secure the business, users that aren't informed properly or educated in what is okay to install to protect the organization have inadvertently created a backdoor or a potential hole in the environment. We also see that nation state sponsored attacks from actual government organizations were leveraging a lot of the, let's say, public information around COVID-19 and the WHO specifically, and saying, you know, specifically, can you click on this link? We need you to log in to get your results for the COVID testing, or there's free testing in your area, or there's vaccines readily available, but it's a very limited time. Click here now. And we saw it even get so sophisticated that a group named Charming Kitten, which is a code name for some nation state sponsored groups, actually emulated the World Health Organization login screen and was able to capture actual high-ranking individuals within that organization's credential set to potentially either disrupt communication or potentially infect that organization. So, you know, here's what we're seeing. We're not seeing a link in the email. We're not seeing an attachment. It tells you to go to the site and eventually, you know, steers you there. But the reality is this would have theoretically gone under the radar for traditional preventative and detective control in the form of email security. So how does that affect, you know, smaller to mid-sized businesses? Well, one of the biggest things we saw is that rural counties, and this is huge in Canada, obviously, is that, you know, a lot of these work from home users were now using just like us right now, HD video that's bi-directional. So we're communicating video as well as receiving video as well as audio. And when you multiply that by thousands and thousands, if not millions of users, what you've created now is a load on that infrastructure in rural areas that has not necessarily been defined or designed rather to sustain that level of activity. And so now we're seeing sags, we're seeing outages, we're seeing bandwidth issues, we're seeing, pixelization of video and things like that. And all of that can potentially be an availability issue when it comes to security risk. So over the past year, we've collected some statistics from either data breach investigation reports or trends that we're seeing. But compromised credentials is still number one. In my opinion, multi-factor authentication becomes a great catch-all for a minimum standard of security control and requirements. But those compromised credentials that are out on the dark web, we saw LinkedIn recently hit, we saw Facebook hit for 500 million, we saw 600 million in another ecosystem. So we're talking about billions of credentials that are out there. So I know nobody on this call ever would reuse their password, but let's assume that you're using your Facebook password anywhere else on the internet. Right now, an attacker is probably in that account just because the breach was so big that these lists are being put into automated tools and just they're firing at Amazon, banks, you name it, and they're just capturing credentials and then changing the email so you can't take control again. Another big one is mobile devices. And so again, the distributed nature of how we're working, not every mobile device can be secured. I mean, I personally am an iPhone user and I like it because of encrypted communication and other things. But, if you're an Android user or even one of those one-off type of firms that are using, say, a lesser technology, well, those communications aren't encrypted. And so, you might want to potentially look at your provider to make sure that if you are prescribing from that type of technology, that they do have secure options available. And again, MFA becomes that best of breed as far as stopping the path of least resistance for an attacker. Another set of interesting details that we found were that specifically IT individuals were leaving assets unsecured so that they could have a backdoor into the environment to help organizations if they need to remotely get into, say, a server or reset someone's password locally on a system that they could only get access to from that organization. Second was new hardware. So to be able to expand, to be able to support VPN connections across thousands of users that historically have never connected remotely, we saw deployment of a significant amount of VPN architecture, of perimeter devices, hardware gear that really wasn't necessarily configured properly. It was configured for ease of use with similarities like an any rule on a firewall, just to let everything through so that we can get communications and operations established. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a secure configuration. Also, home networks are out of scope for security assessment typically. So we can't, from an offensive testing standpoint or a penetration testing standpoint, we can't test home networks. So that means all the assets on that home network, which average between 15 and 50, depending on how many people are in your organization or your home, those organizational assets that you are using for your business are now using the same insecure network that these other devices are riding on, meaning an iPad 1 that was given to your child because it was a legacy device that can't upgrade and you want them to be able to watch YouTube. Well, now that one asset doesn't have patches anymore and allows an attacker to get into your network. Once they get there, there's theoretically trusted communication between that asset and your machine. And again, education becomes the biggest way to mitigate some of these, just enabling the users to be more secure is that final bullet there. So let's get into some of the practice around security consulting. One of the things that we find is that organizations, especially with changing technology akin to Moore's Law and whatever you want to leverage to illustrate the point of how rapidly technology is changing, what we find is that CIOs and CISOs in our client space of 2,000 plus clients are not apt to put their name on the line of a product vendor. I mean, look at Symantec, for example, an organization that was purchased by Broadcom and it was leading the market share as far as endpoint protection. And then you see Broadcom acquire it and sunset that product and start to push it into a dark corner where it dies a slow death, unfortunately. And that's just one example of a vendor mistake where they've purchased a solution set or a portfolio and they didn't put development time and effort into it to make it consistently, operational. And so we see a mass exodus of endpoint protection providers to other endpoint solutions. And because the CISO or CIO doesn't want to say, hey, I'd like to buy X technology and replace everything we have, 30,000 endpoints, I want to replace with a technology that I've barely been able to throw time at. I haven't necessarily had hands on it for a POC and things like that. So we can help shortlist that process. And not only with our experience and feedback loop of our clients and what they're doing, right, and give you back those trends and patterns, but if we can relate it to the top 10 IT security actions to protect internet connected networks, for example, that was decreed by the Canadian Center for Cybersécurity, and then map those items and say, okay, well, the number one recommendation for all IT security networks within the country have been aligned to these very specific items. And there's no mystery why the feedback we're getting from the surveys of our client base illustrate why these are number one issues, right? And consolidate, monitor, and defend internet gateways. The incident response plan has to be able to deal with that, right? That's number one on the top 10. Number 8, host protection. We talked about endpoint security, and that becomes another big one. Enforcement of its administrative privileges. If I can compromise, Sally in IT, for example, but I can't get anywhere else, well, that just minimizes the damage. And now we can respond, we can enrich our decision-making and improve defensive capability with that attack data versus that admin having domain admin, for example, and being able to pivot to any network device that she can access as a direct result of being compromised. A lot of organizations may say, yeah, we have pretty much everything locked down. One of the first things I say is what about social engineering? What about the non-technical means of extracting action or data from your users, like a phone-based attack or an email phishing campaign or a physical engagement where we might show up as, say, with a Santa Claus costume or a postal uniform and get in the building to then drop a network device and have full access to the network. But let's back up a little bit and talk about what does a phishing email really do as far as the impact of the business? Well, the first thing, obviously, is you're going to open it. We've all seen these images or these emails, rather. You're going to look for red flags. You're going to see if your spidey senses tingling, if you will. And if not, you're going to act on that email. And once we see that happen, within seconds, we see malware deployed, credentials stolen, and remote access to the network. This often includes writing rules in your Outlook outbound settings so that any password reset email that comes in is immediately deleted, and any incoming or outbound financial statements are forwarded to an attacker. All of this can happen within seconds with automation. And so once they have remote access, then it just gets worse. The database is stolen. Depending on your disclosure responsibilities, that can be the end of the game right there. Your business could be shut down depending on what your personally identifiable information, personalized information, or non-public confidential government information might be in those databases. Further compromises from there and encrypted outbound communications. Once we hit boom, that is really the point in time in which you lose complete control of the narrative. At that point, you are no longer in control. Up until this point, a significant amount of cybersecurity control could have potentially slowed down the attacker or mitigated the issue. We see the FBI or investigative firms contact the agency, whether it's the mounted police, right, or the FBI. Then we see social media sentiment fall. We see reputation impact. We see financial impact. We see the C-suite needing updates every hour, on the hour, for days and weeks on end, exhausting that already exhausted team that's working overnight to get things up, because the C-suite needs to be informed for their press conferences and media output and that and the like, right? Forensics then can prove or disprove actual theft of data, which then can aid on disclosure responsibility. You have a board of directors meeting. Usually at this point, people are terminated. You start to look at the difference between a lack of due diligence and crossing into gross negligence, as we're seeing some of the basic security controls. If they're not in place today, that's starting to be where these investigations lead, and eventually further investigations till completion. And the reason this is important is because this may seem alarming, like, oh, wow, one click of one email results in people getting fired and fines and even jail time of executives. But what can we do to stop it? What are the actual ways that we can help prevent some of this? And there's a lot. Each one of these potential controls can slow down or stop an attacker, depending on their attack vector. But each one is not any of these are a silver bullet, whether it's ransomware prevention that we're talking about, or whether it's just a credential compromise because of these recent, Facebook and LinkedIn compromises we saw. Each one of these have their own way to mitigate an issue. And if you think of it like Swiss cheese, where one piece of Swiss cheese might be email security, and another piece might be EDR, and another one is IAM. And eventually there's only so much for an attacker to be able to slip through to be able to successfully still do what they want to do. And even after boom, even after you lose control, there's still ways that we can help with incident response, whether it's forensics, whether it's sensor-based deployment to mitigate the issue. And we've been instrumental in stopping entire cities from being ransomware over the past year. And here's a snapshot of just some of our vendors that we work with that can help mitigate some of this, whether it's backup resilience and next-gen vaulting with Cohesity or Pure, whether it's incident response and forensics with EDR and boots on the ground pointed dead box forensics, or it's traditional security control like email security or privileged access management or network security. And if you really want to get advanced, we even have threat hunting partners where for a subscription, they can go out on the dark web and on the clean web and find these issues and see what these attack groups are chattering about before they actually attack. So again, when it comes to incident management, you may be saying that sounds great, but how can we start now? Well, a tabletop exercise is a great way to start. We take real world scenarios, we marry it up with the technology and teams you have, and we give you a few days worth of workshopping and output to say, here's what an actual scene would look like. And when you think you have a response in place, this is a great way to test it out, because you can say, okay, well, what's your response? And you may say, well, I'd call Carl or Janine down in HR or IT. Well, now the phone systems don't work because they were IP based, and all of the communications lists of everybody to call was in SharePoint, which is now offline. So how do you actually contact everybody? And throwing wrenches in the works like that to get people to think creatively instead of when it's in the heat of the moment can enrich your program and ultimately your response. And here's a quick snapshot of what it might look like with a tool that might aid that response time. I mean, really what we're talking about is shortening your mean time to respond. And if you can shorten that from detection to response, and in this example, it goes from 80 something minutes to 1 minute, that can radically improve your positioning, because we're just trying to be ahead just a little bit of the attacker. They're always going to be out there and we're always going to be fighting this battle. But if we can get an edge anyway, just like playing blackjack at a casino, you might win ultimately. And here's just some visuals of what that looks like if we have some engineers and architects on the line. How do I actually hunt? How do I actually look for an IP or an indicator of compromise? And that's where we would see these type of screens here. Ultimately reducing a needle in the haystack of thousands of potential indicators of compromise to say, no, here's exactly what happened. This person clicked this, it went here, and it's active in these segments of your network, which then you can neutralize and otherwise remediate. So let's talk about some of these opportunities. So we talked a little bit about out-of-band communication. Establishing that second mode of communication outside of your ecosystem is huge. As soon as you're potentially compromised, an attacker could be sitting on an inbox or on a conference line bridge, listening to your entire plan. So it's very important not to send traditional bridges and traditional email communications out for your all hands on incident response call to get a lay of the land and formulate a defensive strategy, because the attacker could be listening. This happens all the time. So we see, sometimes they'll spin up, our clients will spin up a Microsoft tenant that's brand new, like an out-of-band ecosystem that they can collaborate in and communicate with, or even something like Slack or Cisco WebEx or Zoom, right? So these are the type of things that you might want to have in your back pocket, including the vendor contact info and licensing and the like. We talked about building a car while driving it. This is something incredibly important. We get in these incident response situations, but sometimes clients don't even have disaster recovery understood. We're talking about the difference between IT operations and security, which would be a maturity of that, right? And so if we can get DR in place with your applications that support the business and corresponding systems understood, including application owners, and ideally the mean time to restore these applications before a detrimental impact, or the RTO, RPO, if you're familiar with DR and BCP terminology. Network segmentation, making sure your network's not flat. So if one person's compromised, it doesn't spread everywhere immediately. Identity hygiene with having a limited amount of admins and group admins, and making sure privileged access is as a as needed basis. It's limited and it's requested in the moment. Another big one is cyber insurance. If you don't have cyber insurance, I would highly recommend you look into it, not just as a quote unquote insurance policy, but as a layer of attorney-client privilege between you and the public when it comes to disclosing an incident. If you can have the cyber insurance team contact the legal team, which then contacts the incident response team, well, now all the findings that happen are communicated through legal to you, and you have the right to disclose or not disclose. And obviously you have to marry that up or weigh it between your federal and otherwise your disclosure responsibilities. We talked about education. That layer 8 issue or the people will always be there. I wouldn't be in this industry if there wasn't a deficiency in the human, let's say, the way that we want to be accommodating and the way we want to be helpful. And if you can capitalize on that from an attacker standpoint, either through an email link or convincing them over the phone to get up a password, I mean, 86% of the time we can get credentials over the phone. So what does that mean for all of the layers of technology you might be investing in? If I can immediately get to the admin's laptop and get on their workstation, I've just bypassed everything as an authorized user. So what can we do to help? What can you do? Prioritize response over prevention. Most organizations we talk to, their prevention investment is way more as weighed to their response and let's say mitigation strategy once something does happen. So is it acceptable for something to be down for weeks on end as you restore operations? Have you considered the fact that if you pay a ransom, theoretically that could be a felony in and of itself, depending on your jurisdiction, if that group is a nation state sponsored attack and deemed as a terrorist organization? So when we saw the questionnaire earlier where people said, 38% or something of people said that they may buy as much time as they can and then eventually pay the ransom. Well, what if that's not an option? Because everybody that paid the ransom is now potentially a suspect in a felony case because they didn't read the jurisdiction and requirements for that. And so those are some of the things we can help. And then again, making sure that you've prioritized, the concept of it's not if, it's when. You've probably heard a million times, but that's the reality. And when something does slip through, how do you minimize that response time from detection to resolution? And if you can prove to auditors and third parties and your partners that we have a solid plan and here's when it worked, that might, to my point at the beginning of the situation, the talk, was that might help your stock price and your position in the reputation aspect to the industry and to your clients. And so just to summarize, you can only fight the way you practice, just like martial arts. So when it comes to red teaming, penetration testing, and offensive security, as well as tabletop exercises and proactive incident response, we can help you with that, even if it's just from an external outside-in perspective. If you want to make sure you're not the low-hanging fruit on the internet, please reach out to your PCD sales team, and we can get engaged in that way. So thank you so much for the time, and I hope you found it valuable today.
Thank you, Sean. We're going to go with Jan White for questions.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, Sean, one of the questions that came up was about where do we start, right? How do we engage our team when it comes to, the pre-sales aspect of understanding security initiatives, right? I'm going to guess that this question comes from the fact that, maybe this organization doesn't have a CISO, doesn't have somebody responsible for security. And so where do we start? What conversations should we be having first?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ian. And I think if we take the analogy of like a home buyer, right? So there's the role of the inspector that would come in and tell you what might be wrong before you buy the house or after you had the house, you have the inspector. And then you have the general contractor that might organize different, let's say, work streams to help remediate some of those problems. So we can play all of these roles, whether it's the general contractor, the specialist for plumbing, for example, which would be similar to our network engineering team, right? So we can help initially provide some of those gaps that might be in place, that inspection that not just a cybersecurity team, but your third parties, your auditors, your vendors now with SolarWinds and these other issues, ratcheting up vendor management as a concept. You're going to want to have this information ahead of time before you're given it by somebody that's going to ask you to act on it. So I would say we can be that home inspector for you in the form of penetration testing or even a technology-based security controls review to see, okay, is there overlap? Are there ways to dedupe spend? Because maybe you purchased something 5-10 years ago and now that portfolio has been merged with another one and you might be able to reduce cost while also improving your security state. So that's where I would start.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sean. I think from a sales point of view, right? As you mentioned, we've got hundreds and thousands of clients that we're helping with today. I think one of the things around cybersecurity is it's no longer a nice to have, right? It's really a requirement. I've been in the business 20 years now. When I started my career, nobody knew anything about cybersecurity, right? Those roles around CISOs, director of securities, didn't exist, and we're still maturing. I think those roles internally. And I think the other thing is around investment, right? I know there's a misconception around how much does this cost, right? When you think of security, I think a lot of people think it's expensive, right? Oh man, I can't afford that, right? They don't even know what it's going to cost, but they automatically can't afford it. But I think that that's a bit of a misnomer, right? When, as you mentioned, right, some of our pen testing engagements are $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, right? These are small investments in identifying potential vulnerabilities in your environment. Some of the solutions that we've talked around endpoint protection or MDRs, managed detection response solutions, right? We're not talking, millions of dollars here. We are talking, potentially smaller investments that can really help mitigate some of the risk that our clients are facing. So I got another question here for you, Sean. Industry specific wise, this is a good question. Are we seeing any specific industries being targeted as part of ransomware attacks, or is this something that all customers need to be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. All customers should be aware of the issue. And I think it's about weighing the likelihood and impact, right? So if we're looking at impact, critical infrastructure is being targeted in a very surgical way, exposed PLCs on the internet. I mean, with a basic search in 30 seconds, I can show you exposed critical infrastructure gear that's out there. However, I would say if we're talking about a pattern that we're seeing in the industry, some of these crime groups have formed cyber cartels, and they are targeting the stressed industries, meaning the industries that are overworked right now due to this pandemic, and that's healthcare right out of the gate. That's manufacturing, because they historically have never worked remotely, and now they have some people that are maybe riding some weird team viewer type of setup or whatever into the environment to a jump box that's running Windows 7 that could be compromised with a TI-83 calculator or something, right? So these are the things that we're seeing as far as trends is the low-hanging fruit being picked off, almost like in a savanna, right? Seeing the gazelle getting picked off, right? It's one of those things. So the message is, don't be the low-hanging fruit. At a minimum, have some basic investment in the control to be at least faster than your competitor that's on the internet.
Great. Yeah, I would say, Sean, you mentioned a number, right? That we've had 39 of our clients, right, have an incident so far the last, I'd say, 4 months. And just, myself being on a lot of those calls where we're getting called at, 11, 12 at night, it really is agnostic of technology, right? We've had, like you said, healthcare, financial services companies. We've had airlines. We've had, utility companies, right? There's a lot of, transportation, right? Trucking companies. All data is valuable, right? No matter what industry you're in. And I think that that's something that has been at least really eye-opening is, where there is no specific attack industry, right? No matter what industry you're in, it's an area that we need to look at protecting. So
yeah,
that's great.
Think one thing to add to that is also that every industry has a different budget for this, right? Some organizations, maybe this security budget is shared with IT, unfortunately, which is still more common than not. And I think if the organization can understand that we will try and take a hybrid approach, I mean, real world security requires both the best of breed technology as well as free process changes. So, you look at EDR, we look at lateral movement, the number one way ransomware is spread throughout an environment. Well, yes, we can work with you to produce an endpoint protection technology investment that can minimize the attacker's movement on the endpoint, but also changing local admin so that nobody in the organization has local admin rights at all is literally $0 if you don't need to measure the operational overhead. So that's one of those things where that hybrid approach of best of breed technology with free experience-based process changes that can be procedural in nature is really how we can help some of our mid-market customers and up balance the budget with really getting security value.
Perfect. Great, Sean. One final question before we end here, which is around how our teams support remotely, right? In this sort of new life of COVID, right? From a services point of view, are we able to help our clients with pen tests remotely? Do we need to be on site when it comes to looking at a SIM or an EDR? How much of these engagements can be done remotely, right? Because this is our new normal, Sean. So if you could just touch on how our ability to drive some of this through sort of consultative sales like this, right? Jumping on a phone call on a WebEx. If you could just talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I think, without getting too far into our methodology, we have developed a workflow where we can produce internal penetration testing securely and remotely 100%. We also, let's be honest, there's a trade-off to not being in the room. There's no replacement for human interaction in a war room, sitting down over a table, planning things out. But what we found is that what you give up for that, you also get the ability to be dynamic and be almost readily available at all times. So those 39 or so different incidents that we've helped customers or potential customers out over the past year have been because we were there and available. We were able to answer the phone call and within an hour or two neutralize the incident. And so I think that may have been more difficult had we been on a plane in the, let's say 30 or 40 different events that we may have done in 2019, right? So I think that becomes a way in which we can organize all members of a global team in the client side, as well as the best of breed SMEs on our side to produce a remote-based outcome that's, unparalleled in my opinion.
Yeah, no, agree. I completely agree, Sean. I think when COVID first started, we all started working from home. Myself, I've worked from home for 20 years, right? So this wasn't a huge change. A bit of a change having a 5 and a 7-year-old in the background all the time, right? Teaching, homeschooling them, which I know a lot of the folks on the phone can probably could feel my pain, But again, as you mentioned, right? I think we've really adapted to being able to support our clients remotely, and until the time when we're all able to get together again and have a session like this. At a nice waterfront hotel, right, Jimmy, Pierre? We're going to do this. We're going to do this right. Maybe on a golf course next time. Until then, the team is here to support you. Continue to reach out to your local team with Pierre and folks, and they can leverage Sean and I at any point. So, everybody, thank you for the opportunity to present with you this morning. And Pierre, I'll pass it off to you.